Well, that's not the nicest picture of a man. Welcome, YouTube. We are going to watch a video about Dark Souls 2 hitboxes by Babe1, Babe2, and that's actually pretty cool channel because I actually got recommended their stuff in the past, and they are making videos about hitboxes. So yeah, let's jump into it, shall we?
People talk a lot of crap on Dark Souls 2 hitboxes.
That's true.
Nobody has played this game and not screamed, "How did that hit me?"
That's every single Souls game ever.
But is the game really that jank, or do we all just suck? I took a look at Dark Souls 2 in slow motion, hitboxes on, and the answers I found surprised the hell out of me. In this video, we're going to be building up to the most accused bosses of crappy hitboxes. So by the end of this, you can decide for yourself, are Dark Souls 2 hitboxes really that bad?
So, vast majority of complaints about Dark Souls 2 hitboxes are just people that straight up get in roll cut, but they do not understand the idea of the roll catching, so they just complain about the fact that they click the dodge button and they didn't survive. There is that pursuer meme that grabs a player, like we actually had it here at the beginning, exactly same thing, yeah? Talking about, maybe it was that exact video. So what happened, for example, here, you can see it. Let me see if I can actually use, yeah, okay, so this is a frame by frame. Let's see what happened here. The guy is in the roll and he is already here in the recovery. This is a moment that this person is donzo. Also, the grab hitbox and overall hitboxes, those are capsules that are usually a little bit bigger than the blades itself, and that's basically how it works, how it always used to work. There was that, for example, in case of this part here, yeah, we're gonna be able to see the Raimi's sword being actually bigger than, or the hitbox, the capsule being bigger than the sword, you see? We are not talking about this big one, we are talking about this one, yeah? The capsule around the sword. If you're gonna compare this capsule to the sword itself, it kind of has aura around it, so it's hard to spot, but overall, the capsule is definitely way bigger than the sword itself. It's just the way how the Souls games works and they always used to.
Before we start, there's one thing that Dark Souls 2 does that no other FromSoft game has done since. It's something that you need to keep in mind as we go through this. In Dark Souls 2, the adaptability, and for some reason also the attunement stat, directly influence how many iframes you have in a roll. You can see from Adam Barker's video the difference a starting class adaptability makes compared to a character with adaptability well leveled.
It's worth to mention that you don't really need to develop your adaptability as much as it's only possible. Going for the 92 agility, which is basically the stat that defines your iframes, is just more than enough, frankly.
This variance in iframes, which some players don't even know exists, is part of the frustration with the game, but it's not even close to the whole story. First up, the last giant. His arm swing hitbox is what you expect, but then it gets to the end of the swing. This is my pet peeve with early FromSoftware. Just adding hitboxes on appendages that moved a bit, but definitely are not anticipated to be part of an attack. With this boss fight emphasizing positioning to avoid attacks, it just feels kinda lame to get backhanded out of nowhere. That and this little beauty. When the boss uses its severed arm as a weapon, which is pretty badass, the hit capsule extends well beyond the model and is much thicker than the swings previously. It adds some arbitrary difficulty to his second phase, requiring tighter roll timings without having anything visually to communicate that to the player. There is some very cool stuff that this boss does, like area of effect attacks that have different effects based on how you get hit. There's the initial stomp attack, but then after it lands, a growing AoE expands from the impact. In action, if you are hit directly under the foot, you get squashed, but if you get hit by the extending blast, you get blown away, taking about half the damage, rewarding you for at least avoiding the initial stomp. The Taurus Demon from Dark Souls 1 has a similar idea, but the AoE appears instantly and doesn't have any kind of special effect. You just take full damage even well after an otherwise decently timed roll. I've got a whole video covering Dark Souls 1, and you can check that out as well. But essentially, you have a good example of a Dark Souls 2 hitbox actually being significantly more dynamic and intuitive than games in other titles that maybe you hear less complaints about. A win for Dark Souls 2. The Covetous Demon. Kinda just an ugly blob rolling around, not sure how this thing convinced the developers to let him in the game in the first place. No. All right. Well, this boss is a pushover because you simply walk away from his attacks most of the time. But he does induce panic when his tail is going nuts, looking like it's about to damage you. It can launch you, but very often doesn't have any hit detection on it. So sometimes hit detection isn't where you'd think it would be, but other times he swings an arm attack, but apparently his gingivitis is contagious because his mouth hurts you too. He does have a similar expanding AoE hitbox after his belly flop, kind of fun. So there is some jank stuff with him, and he is a big beefy boy, but people don't realize Dark Souls 2 was more about positioning yourself around a boss's attacks rather than rolling. You can tell by iframes being an optional stat that they didn't design bosses or enemies around a hard expectation of rolling.
I mean, that's pretty much the same about Dark Souls 1, frankly. Just timing and spacing are the foundations of these games, and this is basically just example of spacing. That being said, in Dark Souls 1, spacing yourself is way harder because you don't have like a free motion of the movement when you are locked on, and well, the lock of movement overall is much faster in Dark Souls 1 in Dark Souls 2 in comparison to Dark Souls 1. Like on its own. It's don't get me wrong, Dark Souls 2 overall is like a less dynamic game. It is slower in the gameplay execution, but when it comes to the player's movement on its own, it's actually faster.
If a boss like this hits you, you probably should have never been in that position in the first place. You'll notice there are few, if any, massive arena-sized AoE attacks in the entire game that require you to nail a 3-frame window roll in order to avoid certain death. For people who disliked Elden Ring, some saying it felt like a rolling simulator, give Dark Souls 2 a try. You might actually like it. Up next, the Smelter Demon. Holy shit, am I allowed to show that? Oh, try face butthole, am I right? Jesus Christ. All right, enough jokes. I promise. Grow up. I agree. So, the Smelted or Delted Demon. His body is surrounded by an AoE flame big enough that it's just about unavoidable with a melee build. And his jump attack turns his entire body into a ball of death, finishing with this AoE blast, which luckily doesn't stick around for long at all. A final interesting note is his sword features 2 hit detectors, one for his standard sword and one extending even further for the flame. It doesn't line up well in game though, because the flame trails behind the sword during his swing, so the flame hit capsule is nowhere near where the flame visually appears at the end of the weapon.
Right, Junk.
You'll notice the flame reconnects with the sword at the end of the swing. Likely when they designed the character in a separate software, that's the way it looks, but in-game, basically roll way earlier than the flame shows if you're trying to get away from it. Sinh the Slumbering Dragon. The first thing I noticed about this boss is how his AoE fire breath attacks work. You'll be playing along and then get absolutely tubed by a wall of flame. This kind of attack is actually handled differently by modern From Software. Flame attacks spawn individual hit detectors spaced out, making it a little easier to roll through them or get a little lucky avoiding damage.
So this is not only this is not the main reason why it is the case. It's mostly because this type of attacks have its own like behavior set. They basically bounce off the walls for one. So if you would actually make a hitbox similar to this, yeah, there is stuff you can do with this type of hitbox. Whereas as smaller particles like that, like just like ball hitboxes thingies, can separately bounce off the walls, yeah, like be somewhat managed by the physics engine, and because of that, like that bounce off the wall effects can actually work. And honestly, I probably would prefer this over that, because this is fucking terrible. Like, I mean, like the bouncing of the walls thing is so annoying.
If you're curious, I have a video covering Elden Ring and its DLC as well. But in Dark Souls 2 though, the dragons are tubed up, as well as other bosses in the game. Rolling through them is much trickier, which reinforces positional play being the primary focus when they designed Dark Souls 2. Sin also has multifaceted AoE attacks, like his fire bomb exploding, then expanding the poison out from it. What's kinda odd is he does have stomp style attacks, which weren't given the expanding pushback hitbox, even though you can see the particle effects being there where it would have been. But they are all over his full body swing attack. I guess when you have a giant dragon that can turn its entire body into a hit detector, you give the player a little mercy here or there. But not here though. This is a roll to the side if I've ever seen one. Because if you manage to roll through the flame ball that he's dragging in front of him, a whiff of his little toesies is the last thing you'll smell before his feet hitboxes take off your head. Old Iron King. You fight this guy on a small platform surrounded by certain death. His hand flame attack is the beam of death we've already seen, but his breath flame attacks are actually similar to the future games.
Oh, interesting.
But here they serve a double.
Because look, this is working similarly to how like Elden Ring fire actually behaves. Like this, the fire hitbox is changing the direction upon like meeting the surface.
Purpose of distracting idiots. Man, this guy's got hella balls.
Lol.
What's funny though is take notice of this hitbox shape on his fist smash attack. Then take a look at his side swipe with his hand extended. They got a little lazy on this one. They just reused the fist one, which doesn't really line up with the extended hand one. Not that big of a deal, but it is fun to know. In reality, this fight is about just not getting hit into the lava, which is obvious from his two-hand smash having a second AoE blast extending well beyond his initial smashdown attack. Eventually, you do reach his phase 2, which has its own quirks. His one-arm smash flame AoE isn't centered around his arm. You'll notice his arm is barely even in it on the left side. So
yeah, they actually tried to focus on the flame here. Interesting.
Dodging to the outside of his arm is way more likely to avoid taking damage than the other way.
Like the flame also goes, like you see, the flame goes more on the side rather on the hand or beneath the hand.
At the same time, his two-arm phase 2 smash, good thing it's well centered because goddamn it is hefty. Luckily, we had cheats on, so we didn't take any damage, popping us up in order to give him a nice goodbye kiss.
Lol. Honestly, this is probably one of the easiest bosses in the entire game though.
Before we get to the most misunderstood boss in the entire game, here are some brief honorable mentions that were requested. Also, if you've liked the video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Royal Rat Authority. His arm swing also includes just a chunky ass head hit detector. I mean, good lord, why use a circle instead of a cylinder around his head? Generally speaking, the vibes are much better under his belly, as his feet don't really pose any threat.
Frankly, vast majority of these junky hitboxes that he mentions, like for example during the technically very first boss fight in the game against Last Giant, or here like the Rat Doggo, I never personally noticed these during like my playthroughs, and I used to play through that game a lot because I was doing my PvP builds mostly manually back in the days of Dark Souls 2. The reason for that is because if you are position yourself correctly, you are nowhere nearby these janky hitboxes. In fight against the Pursuer, yeah, like this grab, you are literally just strafing the guy to the other direction. Like, I mean, like, this is the bad move in the first place, to even go into left instead of right when the attack comes from opponent's right side, yeah? They are going to attack to your left. Going into that direction, furthermore, like trying to roll into that direction is just fucking stupid. You are playing the game incorrectly. You are spacing yourself, strafing yourself incorrectly. If you would go to the right side, you wouldn't need to dodge at all. You would just like walk to the side and you would have an opening for the attack. You don't have to do any defensive action besides just moving. That doesn't consume any stamina at all. So like, for me, for example, many of these hitboxes that I see here are just kind of surprising even, because I never had any issues with them in the first place. I didn't even know about existence of some of them, because you just do not really encounter them during like optimal play.
I'm convinced Clifford, the big red dog, would have been put down immediately. What's a little odd is that his front paws have hit detection to the floor, but his back feet, it's way higher up on that higher bone. Works in the player's favor though.
It does.
It's a lot less likely you or your summon are going to be tall enough to, get hit. And lastly, to answer, how close can you get to his vomit attack? I was surprised by this because the special effect of the poison is just multiple circular textures on the floor, but the hit detector is one singular expanding circle. It doesn't exactly match the actual poison on the floor. Sometimes it's farther than the poison, sometimes it's less. It also despawns earlier than the poison SFX does. So how close can you get to the vomit poison attack? Yes. Giant Lord. Just showing this because it's funny to see this big, scary boss attack compared to where we are now.
Lol.
Let me know if you think a mod where you try to beat Elden Ring as a Dark Souls 2 character with the same iframes, healing, clunky movement would be fun.
Oh. Brah. You have no idea what you're asking for. It would be actually fucking way easier in many aspects. In Dark Souls 2, you can actually cancel your animation of the dodge, like entire recovery, which essentially gives you the double dodge, which can, with the proper amount of the iframes, double the amount of your iframes overall. This guy, he might not, for example, play properly unlocked, because Dark Souls 2 movement is all about the unlocked play. And maybe that's why he's saying that, but like Dark Souls 2 movement, when you're playing accordingly to how it, like, you're supposed to play optimally, you are not movement restricted whatsoever. There is not much of a clunky movement if you're playing unlocked.
Or hell. Fume Knight is well polished. Everything as expected, but here's two of his most requested attacks visualized.
This sword loses hitbox early, yeah.
And finally, the boss I see the most accusations of hitbox tomfoolery, the Pursuer. A straightforward guy with sword and shield as the game's opening boss challenge. His sword hitbox is consistent across all his moves, but he also has this circular hit detector on his wrist. You might think, that's bullshit, that's not part of the sword, game sucks. And you'd be right, Dark Souls 2 can suck in a lot of ways, but not for this reason in particular. If there's no hit detector close to the boss's body while they swing,
and then, yeah, you would have a situation like with Renala. Renala, on one of her attacks, literally you can just stand next to her and the attacks just goes through the model of your character.
it allows players to just stick to the boss like glue, slipping past attacks. They learned that lesson from Dark Souls 1 and apparently forgot it again because you can trivialize some boss attacks in titles as recent as Shadow of the Erdtree. But here in Dark Souls 2, a game notorious for having bad hit detection, they actually nailed it here and with other bosses in the game as well. The Pursuer's shield hit detector is also quite a bit larger than its model appears, like the opposite of the gray sweatpant effect, but I think it's needed for the attack to feel threatening in the combo. His projectiles also have the shape you would expect to how they appear visually, unlike the arrows in this game for some reason. You can literally walk into the tailing hitbox as it's 3 times the size of the arrow. But we'll cover enemy goofery in another video. Now, the main complaint you see about this boss in particular is his sword grab attack. It has the same hit detection as his weapon, but what confuses people is that if any part of your character model connects with that hit detector, iframes excluded, your character will be placed in the center of the sword, the starting location for this unique grab animation. This works the same with other grabs on similar bosses as well, but it gets particularly silly in clips like this. You'll notice the character's foot is barely clipped by the sword hit detector. The hitbox is placed where it should be and operates as it should, but it sure doesn't look or feel good to play against.
I don't understand this argument even a little bit. Like, people just don't get an idea of getting roll cut.
A potential solution could be having one hurt box surrounding the player's outer extremities, which if hit, don't trigger a grab, but instead take damage normally, while having the torso hurt box be the trigger for the actual grab animation. This should eliminate any jarring teleportation and would make the start of the stabbed animation better line up with in-game events. So in my opinion, this isn't an issue with the boss hitboxes as much as it's an issue with the character model. If you want to see some real goofy ass hit detectors, look at FromSoft's newest release. They have the grab extending way behind the hand so you get teleported backwards into it. Dark Souls 2 is not as bad as you think. So the Pursuer gets a lot of shit, but is actually a solidly built boss from a hit detection standpoint, but is plagued by some of the same animation quirks present in essentially every FromSoft title. Okay,
I'm just gonna stop here for a second. Magma says in the chat that they don't know because that grab actually looks pretty bullshit. And in my opinion, it's just a grab attack. Yeah, this is normal that the placement of the character is going to change onto the grab attack, because like you are not going to make like a different variations of the grab attack depending on the part of the hitbox you get touched on. Like, that would be such a waste of time. It's just representation of the grab attack. It works like that in every single Souls game. Furthermore, it works pretty much like that in every single game that has like typical grab attacks. I shouldn't be stabbed through the chest for letting my foot touch the sword. Why? Maybe because you are thinking in the category of the real life example. Like, you wouldn't fucking get hit, but this is not real life. You are operating with the hitboxes of the opponent and your own hitboxes. It's only visual representation of something, yeah? Of a move that otherwise works consistently with the rest of the game and is basically fair in my eyes.
Ported backwards into it. Dark Souls 2 is not as bad as you think. So the Pursuer gets a lot of shit, but is actually a solidly built boss from a hit detection standpoint, but is plagued by some of the same animation quirks present in essentially every FromSoft title. So overall, I actually found Dark Souls 2 to have more good than bad in its hitboxes by a long shot. I expected to see tons of blatant bullshit in each boss, given how much people reference the hitboxes from the game. This video was just the highlights. I have plenty of footage of bosses' hit detection performing exactly as expected. But let me know if you think there's something that I missed. Also, I want to do a video covering Dark Souls 2 enemies in the future, so leave a comment of which enemies you would want me to cover. Remember, a like and a comment really helps send the video out to people that want to see it, and subscribe to see more. But as always, thanks for watching.
Cool vid. I really enjoy this guy's coverages of hitboxes. I have watched plenty of them. Every single game of From Software has insanely fucking stupid hitboxes or examples of extremely stupid hitboxes. Overall, great video. I have to subscribe to this channel finally. I forgot to do that in the past. GG.